Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hello, it's Debbie Potts, the host of the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, and I'm back today with a guest to talk about hormones and endurance athletes, how chronic stress can impact the whole you from the inside out, including a whole hormone imbalance domino effect that goes on when we do too much of everything, as I did. So if you know about my story, I'll be sharing a lot because it's 10 years and I'm finally focusing on sharing my story so you don't do what I did. Too much of everything. And external stressors accumulate that are nonstop, become chronic. And then we have these hidden sources of maternal stressors that we don't know about unless we test. So we say test and not guess. Hormones, immune system, detoxification, digestion, immune deficiencies, and neuro issues all can be these hidden sources of internal chronic stress, right? So we don't know where the stress comes from. It's from everywhere, inside and out, and it all accumulates through, I always think of it as a beaker of stress coming through. Our hypothalamus is interpreting it all. It's our bucket of stress. Doesn't discriminate if it's, stress for paying bills, stress with your partner, stress with your family, or food that you ate, or doing too much exercise. And then we have all these hidden internal stressors. So we're going to talk about one of the tests that I like to do. As an FDN practitioner and a nutritional therapy practitioner, we like to look at the foundations, working on restoring your nutrition, your digestion, blood sugar regulation, liver detox pathways, phase 1, 2, and 3. We want to work on improving your hormones. And part of that is testing, which we do as FDN practitioners. We like to do 3 to 5, if you can, functional lab tests as a blood chemistry panel, a GI test, stool test, hair tissue mineral test, and find is really important for us to give additional clues. And then the DUTCH test, urine test that measures our hormones through urine metabolites. And then if we can, we do some Zoomers. I like Vibrant Wellness, look at food sensitivities, or the wheat Zoomer. It's amazing what you find doing those Zoomer panels. And put all that together and you see patterns. So it's really putting the missing pieces of the puzzle together to help you get an individualized program and a protocol when needed to repair, rebuild, and restore the whole you from the inside out. So you can be better at, say you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to burn fat, if you're trying to improve performance, you're trying to improve the aging process, maybe all of the above. But we don't know what to do exactly unless we get some data, unless we run some functional lab tests. So I wanted Dr. Kelly to come on the show today. She, as I said, works for DUTCH. She's a licensed naturopathic medicine doctor who completed her medical education at the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon. She also completed a private residency in Pearl Natural Health in downtown Portland for undergraduate education. She also received a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry and cell biology with a minor in cognitive neuroscience from the University of California, San Diego. And she lived right where I am living now. She has been a clinical educator for Precision Analytical, the makers of DUTCH Test, since 2019, and she spends most of her time educating us how dried urine testing can improve the field of women's and men's health. Currently, she focuses on educating women worldwide on the benefits and risk of menopausal hormone replacement therapy. You can find her on social media, Instagram. She usually hangs out at Dr. Kelly Ruef, that's R-U-E-F. And in the show notes, we'll talk about these, but just before I forget, steroid pathways chart, the DUTCH website, DUTCH testing, you can order through me, and We'll talk about hormones for men and women and what the DUTCH test can tell you if you have HPA axis dysfunction, if you have neuroinflammation, if you have low hormones or high hormones. It's that Goldilocks effect for everything. That's cortisol. We need this optimal range, and not too much, not too little, just the right amount. So let's talk to Dr. Kelly and let me know your questions. You can reach out to me at debbiepotts.net website or lowcarbathlete at iCloud, and we can talk more. All right, Dr. Kelly, here we go.
All right, guys, I am excited to talk to Dr. Kelly today from DUTCH Test to talk about how we need to test out, our hormones, talk about chronic stress, how it impacts the whole you, men and women. So we're going to spend more time on men because I think they think women just need the hormones tested. It's not just for females, guys. You need to get tested too. So Dr. Kelly, thanks for coming on the podcast and talk about how we can improve endurance athletes' performance in life and sports.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into this topic, especially talking about men, because you're right. A lot of times we focus on women, but it's so important for men to test their hormones. And I'm always saying, even if you're healthy and you're in your 20s, like get a baseline so that you can compare yourself when you're in your 40s or your 50s, what's normal for you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is people, I find they don't know what their they know what their normal is, but they don't know they could feel so much better. So I feel like people that don't do functional lab testing and don't look at kind of preventative or start doing things now before they actually have obvious problems is that they're kind of just living at they think they're normal and they don't know they could be so much better. So I always find out, people come to me, they don't have any symptoms, but then I do their lab test. I'm like, whoa, we've got a lot going on.
Yeah,
you
right.
You're feeling good, but you could feel amazing if we just fix some things up.
That is true too. Yeah, even if you're in your 20s or 30s and you feel pretty good, sometimes that lab testing can illuminate or pinpoint like high estrogen compared to low testosterone, or maybe you're metabolizing your estrogen down the wrong carcinogenic pathways that might increase risk for prostate cancer. So yeah, there's a lot that we can find out about testing. We always say, test, don't guess.
Yeah, but kind of briefly go over what the DUTCH test is, what it measures and how it's more unique. And then we can talk about my story is really my 10-year anniversary of my adrenal fatigue, adrenal exhaustion, HPA axis dysfunction. But it's kind of my mission this year to talk more about how chronic stress impacts the whole you. So those external stressors, those internal chronic stressors, how they overload our stress beaker, and our body doesn't discriminate one from another, just all accumulates. So I'd love to get down that, and I'm sure there's many rabbit holes to go down, but start with just what is DUTCH test and what are we looking for this test? Why should we do it?
Yeah. So DUTCH test, DUTCH is an acronym for dried urine testing for comprehensive hormones. And it's an at-home test, so it's really easy to collect. You don't have to go to a lab. And a lot of it is urine testing, so you're just urinating on 4 strips during the day. We've added on some saliva cortisol testing, so there's the option to look at your cortisol in the saliva too now, which is pretty cool because with saliva you can see your cortisol awakening response, which is that burst of cortisol you get in the morning when you wake up, and it can really tell you a lot about your adrenal health, your overall HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis health, and your resiliency. But basically, we're looking at hormones in the urine. We're looking at testosterone, DHEAS, estrogens, progesterone, but we're also looking at downstream metabolites of these hormones. So we're looking at, how are you metabolizing your estrogen? How do you metabolize your progesterone? How do you metabolize your DHEA and your testosterone? And it turns out the way that you metabolize your hormones can really affect risk for cancer, different symptoms. Men who are aromatizing or pushing more of their androgens over to estrogen tend to have poor lipid profiles, difficulty with erections, mood disturbances, gynecomastia, which a lot of people call man boobs. So
I know that word. I don't know that
yeah, I don't use that word that often, but
word.
yeah, so there's a lot that we can look at the Dutch test, and we're also looking at the adrenal health, the cortisol, which we're going to dive into stress more and how that affects cortisol and hormones. And we're looking at organic acids too, which can tell us about nutrient deficiencies, gut health, dysbiosis, brain inflammation, DNA damage. So it says it in the name, it's comprehensive.
And that's what I always love running a Dutch test on my clients, but it also provides clues that we need to do additional testing, like look at the GI map or Genova to find out what's going on in the microbiome, look at blood chemistry panel, hair tissue mineral analysis, because it provides clues, like you just said, if there's brain inflammation, but it's more why that, okay, we need to find more data and collect and put these missing pieces of the puzzle together than just I've seen people see naturopath and they just get the Dutch done in blood and they just treat the hormones. They're
Hmm.
not treating, why are the hormones out of whack and looking at the whole picture. So I find that, it's just
Yes.
so important to really help people from a holistic approach.
Yes, that's why I like your holistic method. Because
Well,
you're
yeah,
attacking it from all the angles, which is important because it's different than just looking at like, oh, estrogen is high. I'm just going to give you chrysin or an aromatase inhibitor, to slow that conversion of testosterone to estrogen in a man. Whereas the underlying cause is maybe he's overweight, maybe his insulin is high, maybe he's just got full of inflammation because he's got leaky gut and dysbiosis. So I know with your holistic method, you're really diving in and you're trying to understand, okay, what is increasing that conversion of testosterone to estrogen, not just
yeah.
slapping a supplement on there, like let's just slow it down.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of people just come to me and they have 5 different hormone supplements they're taking. And it's not looking, well, why are they so low? What's going on with the gut? What's going on with your life? What's going on with your exercise program? You're fasting, you're doing everything too much. And really liver congestion. I find so much the liver and thyroid full panel and the microbiome is so fascinating to put that together with the Dutch test. And so I think it's just great for people to remember it's not just treating the results, we treat the whole person.
Yes, yes, 100% agree. I love it.
So with the Dutch test, and I know, people get it done, you get the results back, and it helps us figure out what kind of clues do we get with maybe how they're living life as a race, not a journey, and pushing everything to the extreme and doing kind of more is better. What do we see and how that can help people that are looking to kind of biohack or improve their aging process, fat loss, performance, all that? What can we get from this?
Yeah, so with the Dutch test, we're seeing a lot of not only hormone levels and like actual result data, but with it, we can see patterns emerge. And for example, in people who have a lot of inflammation in their body, who maybe have high insulin, you tend to see more convert, like especially, well, men and women, you see more conversion of their androgens over to estrogen. In women, sometimes you'll see higher androgen levels in general, like think like PCOS and insulin resistance and in inflammation. Um, you tend to see a preference of metabolizing their androgens like testosterone and DHEA down what we call the alpha pathway, which is the more potent pathway, the more androgenic pathway. So some women with PCOS who have insulin resistance, they might have high androgens, plus they're pushing them down the more androgenic pathway. So it's going to worsen hair loss, it's going to worsen acne, body hair growth. But even with estrogen, we can see how so there's 3 different pathways we're looking at for phase 1 of estrogen metabolism. And we can tell if someone's pushing more down the 16-OH pathway, that's a proliferative estrogen. And people who tend to push down that pathway might have more exposure to pesticides. They might have a higher omega-6 fatty acid diet. They might be overweight. They might have hypothyroidism. It's a long list. They might be taking St. John's wort. Whereas people who are pushing more down the 4-OH, the carcinogenic pathway, They might have more, alcohol, smoking, even environmental chemicals. The one that comes to mind is the PAHs, those polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that you find in like wood fire smoke, charred, smoked foods. That tends to push the 4-OH pathway too. And inflammation in general pushes the 4-OH and the 16-OH pathways. So there's patterns that emerge. There's kind of nuances in the test that once you start seeing a bunch of the patterns of high insulin and inflammation, then you start thinking, okay, this is a really strong pattern in this person. Maybe we really should look more into their blood sugar. Maybe we should do a continuous glucose monitor. Maybe we should measure the CRP high sensitivity to look at inflammation in their body, or do a gut test to look at for leaky gut.
Mm-hmm. But the insulin, so the insulin is high, which again, you guys, when you do your blood chemistry panel, doctors never seem to do insulin. It's been my fight the last couple of years. Like,
yes,
test people's insulin. So you can order it on Ulta Labs or Direct Labs. There's different places to order your own blood chemistry. But insulin marker, if it is high, like is it over 5? Is it, result of chronic stress versus you don't know if it's a result of chronic stress or how you eat? Because I know my body, because I think of, does it go the other way is my question. If I have chronic stress, that excessive cortisol release will spike up my cortisol, which will spike up my glucose, which will cause insulin to go up and cause insulin resistance from chronic stress versus eating high carb, sugary processed foods.
Yes, both of them. And a lot of times they go hand in hand. So a lot of times when someone's stressed out, and there's many different stressors on the body, but a lot of us are thinking about perceived stress or anxiety, work stress. But anyways, when someone's stressed out, it does tend to elevate their cortisol because it's a natural reaction, right? If we think we're running from a bear, we're going to want to increase the adrenaline and the cortisol so that our body is ready to run away or to fight this bear. So our cortisol increases, and you're right, cortisol tends to mobilize blood sugar. Like cortisol's whole purpose, well, it has a lot of purposes, but a big purpose is to get sugar into the blood so that we can, have fuel to run away or to fight a bear. And when more sugar goes into the blood, then more sugar is going to try to get into the cells. But over time, the cells become very full of sugar and stored fat. And they say, I don't want any more sugar. Like, I'm done. And they kind of downregulate their glucose receptors. And so they don't take in as much sugar. And that's when the body starts increasing insulin, because insulin is that hormone that really convinces the cells to take in sugar. So the body starts making more and more insulin. All right, cells, come on, you got to take this sugar into the cells. Like, we can't have it hanging out in the blood. We need it to go into the cells so we can make energy, so we can run away from this bear. But over time, you get insulin resistance just from stress.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're insulin resistant, then we tend to have more cravings.
Mm-hmm.
We're feeling depleted in the cells, so we tend to have more cravings and go down the junk food pathway.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, for me, when I had my stuff start happening, I felt like I was insulin resistant without being officially tested years ago. And I felt like I was already eating low carb, but probably not eating enough and not eating, many carbs at all. And into my keto, when I was early on, I was like bulletproof coffee all morning long and one meal a day. And so I was more probably low energy availability, which was another stressor probably, and exercising a lot. But I think it wasn't really my nutrition that was spiking my glucose up. It was all my other sources of stress accumulating in my stress beaker. So I was curious, like, oh, it doesn't you don't have to. What I try to tell people when I speak at conferences, especially, this low carb cruise I'm going on again, and there's all these people struggling with weight loss and they're doing keto and carnivore or whatever they're doing. And I feel like, they have these weight loss stalls because they're not addressing how's your stress, how do you start your day, how do you end your day, how is your quality of sleep, because you're not addressing these lifestyle habits. Because as we said, the chronic stress accumulates and there's no filter of this is the nutrition, too much processed foods, too much vegetable oil, too much sugar. And I just think it's so important people to realize you have to, look at the whole you. But that's my experience, my own observations, people that are struggling with weight loss, even if they're changing nutrition, it might be some other things going on.
Yeah, it totally makes sense because once that cortisol goes up, once that insulin goes up, it's really hard to lose weight when you're insulin resistant. No,
the insulin resistant, but with people a lot of people come to me and they're struggling with weight issues and they can't lose weight no matter what they do nutritionally and exercise. But how does the DUTCH test identify clues to, why we can't get weight off? Why are we more of a slow oxidizer? What else could be going on? And of course, we want to look at the full thyroid panel and all the other stuff. But what can we pick up some clues to help put those missing pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah, there's a few things that we can see on the DUTCH test in regards to weight. Of course, we look at the cortisol. So if we see high cortisol, then we're starting to think, all right, if this is going on long term, we're going to have more of an increase for insulin resistance. It's really hard to lose weight when you're insulin resistant, when your insulin is elevated. Besides that, we can look at I like to look at the androgens, like the testosterone, the DHEA, because androgens are really important for building muscle mass and for maintaining a lean body mass, for being able to exercise, for being able to recover from exercise, and for weight loss. Besides that, weight loss, some people have difficulty with weight loss if they're inflamed. And there's a lot of markers on the DUTCH test that can point towards inflammation. I think there's like 12 different patterns that we see. And with the organic acids, we might see an elevated pyroglutamate, which is the glutathione marker. So if it's elevated, then glutathione can be deficient. That can be a sign of inflammation. Glutathione is our major antioxidant. So if we're using it up quickly, it'll be low. We have a indican marker, which indican tells us a little bit about dysbiosis and bacterial overgrowth. So if someone's indican is elevated, we might think that there could be some dysbiosis, maybe possibly leaky gut, maybe looking further into a gut test. And what else? The kynurenate. Kynurenate is another marker that we have that elevates with inflammation, and also quinolinate elevates with inflammation. And we even have a marker that's called 8-OHDG, which elevates when there's actual DNA damage from inflammation. So I'm keeping a lookout on the adrenals. I'm looking at patterns of inflammation, and then I'm looking at the androgen levels. And for men, I even look at the androgen to estrogen ratio, because we don't want to have less androgens than estrogen, right? We want to have a good balance there in order to lose weight, in order to have healthy erections, and to have a healthy lipid profile, healthy bone mineral density. Like estrogen, men don't realize estrogen is so important for their bones. And if it's low, then I start to worry about men's bone mineral density, even if their testosterone looks fine. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, testosterone, that's a big topic, but I know we can go into more with the performance side of it. But I think, looking at the markers reminds me, so many men are high estrogen and they come out with, signs of liver congestion because they're not metabolizing their estrogens. So men and women, but I find more men come out from the DUTCH test looking like, all right, we've got some other things going on that you're not metabolizing those hormones, and looking at liver congestion and having to clear up the pathways. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah, which brings me to another pattern you see on the DUTCH. When you're not, so we can see if someone's clearing out their cortisol well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if people aren't clearing their cortisol out well, then you start to see that with things that slow down metabolism, right? Or you see it with, suboptimal liver function, or hypothyroidism, or poor mitochondrial function, or low iron. Iron is important for activating thyroid and also for the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So that can also give you a little bit of some clues about poor metabolism poor liver function that might tie into weight loss.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, because I find so many people, they have, their liver seems to be always involved in this as part of it. And so I love looking at DUTCH tests. It takes me forever to look at it because every test is unique, and starting to see patterns that correlate with that client's goals and their symptoms, and look at what else is going on with them, but how much you can kind of look at all these patterns together. It's kind of always fascinating to me, and being that health investigator with the support. But I think it's the metabolism that slows down, but the why, and always looking at, what you can do to figure out, programs, as we talk about lifestyle and nutrition, but just how so many people will just say your testosterone's low, take testosterone. So talk a little bit about, testosterone on the test, because every male and females that are trying to get stronger, they want to improve performance. How does testosterone, what other hormones on the panel that we get from DUTCH tests help us figure out how we can improve our performance and athletic performance from the DUTCH test?
And that's a really good question, because those androgens like testosterone really do support our bones, our ligaments, our tendons. Like I said, ability to gain muscle mass and to lose weight, to stay fit, to be able to exercise and recover from exercise. Men and women, it's different, because men, 95% of their testosterone comes from their testes, and like 5% comes from their adrenal glands. Whereas for women, it's about half and half. I say directly and indirectly, about half testosterone comes from the ovaries and about half from the adrenals. The reality is 25% of testosterone comes from the ovaries in women, 25% comes from the adrenals in women, and then the other 50% comes from the fat tissue. And it's made from androstenedione, which half of androstenedione comes from the ovaries and half comes from the adrenals. So, directly and indirectly, about 50% and 50% of testosterone comes from the ovaries and the adrenals.
Wow. So always support your adrenals.
Yes. So for women, oh my gosh, I feel like sleep and adrenal support and stress reduction is especially important for their androgen levels. And fat. Some women have really low body fat percentage, and it's going to impact their testosterone.
So if they're too low body fat, their testosterone can be lower because they don't have enough fat to convert.
Yep, they don't have enough of that fat tissue to convert the androstenedione to testosterone. Remember, like 50% of women's testosterone is converted in the fat tissue. So
again, it's the Goldilocks effect for everything. More is not better, less is more sometimes,
right?
But all the time is finding the right amount. So
yep.
But performance, I think, is such an important area to look at. Why you need to do functional lab testing along with how your training schedule looks, as well as your nutrient timing and nutrition plan, right? The hormones come into play.
Yeah, exactly. Because like in men, if their testosterone comes back low on the DUTCH test, then we start thinking, okay, what could be leading to low testosterone? 95% of it comes from the testes. And stress can lower the testes output of testosterone. Low vitamin D, low zinc. So some nutritional deficiencies can lead to it. The blood sugar dysregulation, diabetes, endocrine disruptors. So a lot of times we're looking at all the chemicals, their laundry detergent, their shampoo, and even odd things that you wouldn't think about, like drinking milk. Some milk comes from pregnant cows and it's full of estrogen, and it actually inhibits testosterone production. So,
wow. Another reason not to drink milk. I always think milk is just gross to drink up for years. I'm like, why do we drink milk? But then, that makes sense not to drink milk with your morning toast or with your Oreo cookies.
Yeah. So I've been asked, well, is it organic grass-fed milk? Is that the same? And I would assume so. I would assume some of those cows are pregnant too.
Well, how can they discriminate when they're milking the cows if they're pregnant or not? I mean, do they? I have no idea about milking cows if you can milk a pregnant cow, but That's funny. So,
Yeah.
with testosterone, what other hormones are important to keep in balance as we are aging athletes that we want to, make sure we keep everything in balance so we don't have more kind of, I think, of the domino effect of this whole metabolic chaos that can be a
Mhm.
result of living life as a race and just burning the candle at both ends, chronic stress, parents, working full time, training. We kind of tend to do a lot of everything every day. And you're a new mom, and you probably can relate, like, how do you, really keep yourself healthy so we can keep these hormones in balance that we test here?
Yeah. A lot of it comes down to like pretty much what you describe in your holistic method. It's kind of attacking it from all angles. It goes back to diet, it goes back to stress reduction. I think sleep is really important for androgens and for overall adrenal health. Like they always say, sleep can fix like 50% of your adrenal issues. And it makes sense because when you're sleeping, you can no longer be in that fight or flight sympathetic mode. You're more in that like rest and digest and repair mode. So when you're sleeping, your cortisol is usually low. Sometimes it elevates if you've got blood sugar dysregulation, but usually it's low. So usually it can be very nourishing for those adrenals.
But that's a good topic to just stop and pause, reflect on sleep. Because I
Yeah.
know, as new moms, I was listening to these two gals talk the other day when I was working on my computer at a cafe outside, and they were talking about how they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning every night. And they're like, does everybody wake up at 2, 3 in the morning, or why do they can't fall asleep? Because that was a red flag
Yeah.
when I started to get my adrenal exhaustion. But again, chronic stress impacts
Hmm.
everyone. If that's high cortisol, low cortisol, what does that mean when we get up wide awake at 2 or 3 in the morning? We can't fall asleep.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It can be different. It can be, yeah, there's many different causes for that. Some people say it's liver congestion, like you're not detoxing well. And it is true. Like sometimes if women start doing sauna or they start detoxing better, their sleep improves. Like you definitely see that.
I'm on day
Um,
3 of my sauna.
Yay.
I just
And I want
started it, we got it. So yeah, sorry to interrupt there.
no, I want to talk to
Big
you
one.
about your sauna later. I've got kind of one back here, a little portable one, but um so sometimes liver congestion plays a role. Sometimes it is that blood sugar dysregulation. And when we're sleeping at night, what happens is blood sugar drops in some people. And what does insulin do? It like comes to the rescue and it starts mobilizing more sugar into the blood. And so cortisol goes up. And when cortisol goes up, you become more alert, you wake up. So sometimes it's blood sugar dysregulation. Um, I think sometimes like I had a PT who was talking to me even about retraining bowels. Like I know you were talking about women with children, and she said, yeah, sometimes during breastfeeding, women get really used to going to the bathroom at certain times during the night. So like limiting fluid intake before, a couple hours before, getting more of the fluid intake in the earlier in the day can be helpful. And she said, and just retraining the bowels, like just trying not to go. I mean, it's hard to wake up. Like for me, if I wake up, I just like have to go to the bathroom or I won't fall
Yeah.
asleep again. So
I
limiting the fluid would be helpful.
Yeah, because I wake up and like, well, I better go to the bathroom. And I've heard once someone said you don't really have to go to the bathroom and wake up. You're waking up because of other reasons. But then if you don't go to the bathroom, are you gonna wet your bed? I need to wear diapers going to sleep, so I have to get up. I'm not gonna do that. And so I was thinking it's funny. It's like, well, is it psychological or do I really have to go? And then how can you hold like someone I know that can go all night and I'll go to the bathroom and wake up and they, empty out their whole bladder from the night. But then I can go
Yeah,
like 5 times during the night. It's annoying.
right. And it's gonna depend too on like structural differences. Like, I can't hold my urine as well as I could before the baby. Um,
Yeah.
but also salt consumption. Like at night for dinner, if people are getting takeout or if they're adding a lot of salt to their meals, like they're gonna want to chug a bunch of water before bed.
Mm,
So limiting
yeah.
salt during the day can be helpful. But what else? Oh yeah, just stress. I mean, stress in general, when people are more in that sympathetic mode, I always say the body's wise. It's not like we go to sleep and we reset. You know, I always say, let's pretend that you lived in a community and a tiger would come around the cul-de-sac, a couple times a week. Like your brain is going to remember that and your body is going to remember that. And so when you wake up, you're going to be more on high alert. Okay, like, oh, okay, is the tiger here? Do I need to protect my children? It's not like you reset at night and then in the morning you wake up and you forgot all about that there's a tiger roaming around somewhere. So I know when I was really stressed out in my most stressful days, first of all, you're stressed when all of your symptoms that you've ever like struggled with come back. But I would wake up at like 2:30 in the morning and that was it for the day. Like I'd be up. I could not go back to sleep. So yeah, that's just the
nightmares.
physical stress, that ruminating, that feeling where you just keep saying a bunch of sentences and words in your dream and it wakes you up. It's the worst.
Yeah. So in the morning though too, some people wake up and their cortisol's high. What do we see patterns for that? Because we hear a lot of people testing that there's a cortisol awakening, it should be higher. But what if some people wake up in their morning? So if people don't know, you measure 4 times over a 24-hour period of the DUTCH test.
Yep.
We have our like middle of the night test, and then we have our waking test. But talk a little bit about that morning cortisol response. What is a normal response, and when is it too high or too low? What is that indication of?
Yeah, so the waking sample, so right when we wake up and we urinate on that strip, that represents more of the cortisol when we were sleeping. And if that's elevated, we start to think general stress, alcohol. Some people think gut infections and blood sugar dysregulation. But, then we do take a few samples. If we're looking at the cortisol awakening response, we do that in the saliva. And we're looking at a 30-minute measurement after we wake up, and then a 60-minute measurement after we wake up. And a normal cortisol awakening response, cortisol will rise, it's like 70 to 150% within the first 30 minutes of waking. So if someone has like a really high rise, let's say they have a 300% rise, that tells us that they might have a high level of perceived stress. They might suffer with anxiety, with panic attacks. Their HPA axis is really reactive, so they overreact to stressors. And you tend to see that with more of that kind of sympathetic dominance, the fight or flight, the more just like the stressful lifestyle in general. And the low cortisol, like if you've got a really low response, it can be from just very chronic stress. Over time, the brain, the body, it's wise. It knows that high cortisol is going to end up just having us gain weight and lead to immune dysfunction and slow wound healing. So over time, when cortisol is high, the brain starts to lower its signaling to the adrenals. So over time, after chronic stress, you usually see low cortisol, and you usually see like a low cortisol awakening response. And with a low cortisol awakening response, I always think chronic stress, or sometimes things that impact the brain's health, like concussions, TBIs, sleep apnea, when you're not getting oxygen during the night to your brain, those can lead to a lower cortisol awakening response.
Got it. Had you ever look at the glucose measurements, like do CGMs, NutriSense, or Keto Mojo, prick people's fingers when they're doing that cortisol awakening test and correlate that together?
No, but I want to. That's a really good idea.
Well, I think that's always a big question when people, they freak out when they do their morning glucose or ketone test, and then they're like, okay, is that too high? My cortisol or my glucose is so high, but their cortisol is high, so their glucose will be higher upon awakening. And then if you wait 30 minutes to an hour, like you're doing the morning cortisol test, be interesting to see the changes with your glucose measurements along with cortisol and what is normal, optimal, I hate the word normal, so optimal levels, and what is, too high or too low.
Right.
So that'd be interesting.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. I bet there's a study out there that has a graph.
We can start one.
Yeah.
Another one I always think of, like, oh, that'd be a good lab test to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the other pattern we see is, the morning. So we want to have the cortisol higher in the morning, melatonin should be lower, and then the melatonin should go up at night and cortisol should go down at night. But we have these rhythms that we have, our ideal optimal rhythm of the day of our cortisol to melatonin, but then things get off balance again and we get the melatonin is high and low, everything's off balance. So any tips on patterns you see with people that we should bring up of when cortisol's high at night, they can't sleep, and melatonin's low and melatonin's high in the morning, anything like that we see with stress in athletes?
So on the Dutch test, we're testing melatonin from the waking sample. So it's going to tell us about melatonin production during the night. And if it comes back low, sometimes you'll see elevated cortisol at night or around bedtime. So if people decide to do their workout, right before bed, which, a lot of people do because they're busy all day, and then they finally put the kids down and they're like, all right, I'm going to go do my workout now. But just exercising can elevate cortisol. And so if people are working out right before bed, or if they are looking at screens, getting that blue light before bed, that's going to inhibit melatonin production. So let me back up. I don't know if I clarified that. So high cortisol lowers or inhibits melatonin production, but so do things like blue light. So I always say, it could be helpful to wear those blue light blocking glasses that look funny, or avoiding screens altogether.
I wear daytime ones. That's what I'm wearing, is the daytime ones, because my computer job now, my eyeballs are burning. So I have to wear the daytime ones and the evening ones that are the yellower.
Yes, which is smart. I think it's good to do that, do both of those. I have some daytime ones. I'm not wearing them right now, but I need to find them. We moved and they're lost in transit. But
I think a lot of people have low melatonin, high cortisol at night, but then I've also seen people with really high melatonin that is not just out of whack, but because of neuroinflammation or something else going on. So that's what's fascinating with melatonin. If it's low, but it could also be high, that's indication of something else going on.
Yeah. I always think about gut inflammation, which goes hand in hand with the neuroinflammation when melatonin is high.
Because neuro, brain, leaky gut, you're relating leaky gut to leaky brain, causing that neuroinflammation.
Yep. You tend to see them go hand in hand. I think the gut and the brain, don't they stem from the same tissue type during development when you're a fetus? I think there's this crazy connection between the two. And
it's like the vagal nerve, because they start together, right? And then they develop into two parts.
Yeah.
Yes. I've seen that. But that's a story of the vagal nerve and why it's the brain. The gut brain messages, every one message to brain to the gut is 7 messages back or something. I forget exact number, but
there's a lot of communication. I know that there's a lot of communication between the two. And the famous book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Yeah, somewhere down here.
I forget who wrote that. Gosh, I can totally blanking on his name. It's a great book. It's from the 90s, but he's spot on when it comes to the research around all the things.
Sapolsky.
What was his name?
Robert Sapolsky.
Robert Sapolsky. That's right. He's brilliant. He talks all about, how all the ways stress affects the body. And he goes into really, the research, the depths, the details about how stress affects gut function, and it can leave you with constipation or even diarrhea or bloating, all sorts of symptoms. That's a good book.
I should I haven't read that forever. Should go back. It'll probably make more sense now. I've read this stuff for 10 years, but now I get it. It's what I wish I knew, what does it say? I wish I knew then what I know now.
Yep. Me too. I wish I knew what I'm going to know in 10 years now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So my other question to bring up is, I just find interesting, because again, going back to people just taking all these hormone supplements. And I said, there's a chart, cholesterol, steroid, hormones. Talk about that and cholesterol, and then how sometimes just supporting DHEA can help the other hormones, and how it works together like an orchestra.
Yes. So we do have a steroid pathways. We at Dutch we have a steroid pathways chart that people can download.
Overwhelming for some people. I'll show that. What?
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming, but it goes into if people want to understand okay, what's gonna increase this enzyme activity, or what's gonna decrease this enzyme activity. We've got that all written out. But for example, we can tell the aromatase enzyme, which is the CYP19A1. if we use things, insulin resistance, being overweight, white peony, licorice root, that tends to increase the enzyme activity. And then the chrysin or the aromatase inhibitor tends to decrease it. But so you're asking about the steroid pathways.
Well, just to briefly overview, because I think people don't realize that, cholesterol is important. We need good
Yes.
cholesterol, and how cholesterol actually is needed. So, how cholesterol is made, and then how that cholesterol helps makes our hormones and help, DHA, the relationship DHA to the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and how the chart is, well, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. And because
Yeah.
I find so many people are they're taking testosterone, they're taking estrogen, taking progesterone, and they're just I find sometimes it might be more of a Band-Aid, not looking at why are these hormones off. But sometimes if we just get a little more DHA, does that help? Or taking adaptogens, ashwagandha, dealing with stress, thyroid, it's all so much complicated. That's why we do personalized nutrition and protocols, because it's not one size fits all. But do you see any patterns or notable things that we should share with people to look out for?
Yeah. So you're right. Like cholesterol is kind of the building block for the sex hormones, and it gets converted to pregnenolone. I think we call that the mother hormone. Yeah. But pregnenolone, cholesterol goes into the cell, and it really depends which cell it enters. Now, the type of cell is going to determine what hormone it becomes. And so, the adrenals, if it goes into the adrenal cells, it can turn into DHA or to testosterone, some of these androgens. With the testes, it can turn into testosterone. In the adrenals, it can also, depending on what layer of the adrenals, can also turn into cortisol. So cholesterol and pregnenolone, they are the precursor to cortisol also. But when it comes to actually taking hormones, sometimes people take pregnenolone and they think pregnenolone will increase serum progesterone, which it doesn't directly. Like you don't take pregnenolone and then you see progesterone increase in the serum. It doesn't happen that way. But pregnenolone can convert into some of the same metabolites that progesterone gets broken down into. And we know that the progesterone metabolites, especially the alpha ones, can act on the GABA receptors in the brain. So sometimes they really help with anxiety, with irritability, with sleep. Going back to sleep, like especially oral progesterone. Oral progesterone, 90% of it gets broken down into these metabolites that act on the GABA receptors right after you swallow it when it hits the gut and the liver. But let's talk about DHEA supplementation, because I know DHEA in the US, it's over the counter, and I have seen men before say, oh, my testosterone's low, I'm going to go take 150 milligrams of DHEA. And the research even shows that when men take DHEA, it tends to convert more to estrogen.
Oh.
Whereas, so if you're taking 150 milligrams of DHEA, you're probably increasing your estrogen levels significantly. In women, DHEA tends to convert more to like testosterone and the androgens, less so over to the estrogen. It can still convert to estrogen though. So we do have to be careful with these hormones, and I do think it's best just not to get it over the counter and self-prescribe, because DHEA, it is a hormone. It is going to affect your estrogen, which for men might be a downside for their erections and their lipids. For women, let's say we've got a postmenopausal woman. She still has her uterus, and she decides to self-prescribe 25 milligrams of DHEA a day. It can convert to estrogen, and then she's got unopposed estrogen, which can impact the health of her uterus and set her up possibly for cancer in the future. So it's important to really, understand what hormones can convert into what other hormones, and to see someone who really truly understands the different pathways and the different dosing, so that we don't negatively affect our health.
What about taking, just supporting adaptogens, mushrooms, ashwagandha, rhodiola, stuff like that people can, do stuff now that they can do without getting a naturopath's doctor to get them the right amount of hormones, if they just want to be preventative to optimize hormones?
Yeah. So there's a few adaptogenic herbs, and adaptogenic herbs are herbs that support the HPA axis. or the adrenals can help support cortisol. And the ones that I like that not only support the adrenals and the HPA axis, but also support androgens, if someone's got low androgens, are shatavari, maca, and ashwagandha. It may be tribulus. I don't know if that's an adaptogen, but those three, ashwagandha, shatavari, maca, those can support both the adrenals and low androgens. But just keep in mind, maca and ashwagandha, if people have sensitivities to nightshades, might not be the best for them.
Yeah. There's so much to it. That's why you just can't, get a test and not guess and figure it out. But everyone's so different, and that's why we always sequence supplements in and titrate to see how one supplement responds in your body at a time, because, you can't tell until you take it and notice, okay, how do I feel? Which is another story. People don't often know how to pay attention to how they feel very well, but they're so sympathetic and really realize that. So anyway, suddenly the time's up and we have probably so much more to go into. So if you guys listeners have questions for Dr. Kelly, maybe we can get her on the show again. But I think, looking at why we need tests, not guess with DUTCH tests, look at our hormones, urine and saliva, and really get the full picture of if we can't lose weight, what else is going on, including this test in our functional lab test group. And then, performance gains, people are struggling to get faster, get stronger, gain muscle. And then of course, aging longevity process is a goal, working on your future self now and taking priority of your health. So hopefully people can learn something of all those different things, but I'm sure there's tons we left out because there's a lot to get on the DUTCH test. It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Usually for each person, you can identify like quite a few things that they can improve on, they can work on. So, people say, don't you get bored of going over DUTCH tests all day? And I said, not really. Like they're all so different.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. They're different.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. But thanks for everything you do for DUTCH, and you're taking more of a role in the education. And I see more on social media now. Are you, now that Dr. Carey's working more Rupa, are you doing more of the outreach?
Yeah.
Education?
All of us, we're not, our titles aren't clinical consultants anymore. We're clinical educators. So like all of us are getting more involved, and you'll, everyone's going to be seeing more blogs, more webinars, more social media posts. We're just really up in the education and everyone's pitching in. So it's exciting. It's going to be fun.
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And we look forward to following you on Instagram. Where should people look up and learn more?
Oh yeah. Right now I'm just focusing on hormone replacement therapy, especially menopausal, hormone therapy. So my Instagram, it's at Dr. Kelly Ruef. So DrKellyRuef as in Frank.
Good. Yeah, and we'll talk. I told Dr. Kelly I couldn't leave out the men, so we didn't focus on the women today. So we can do that a separate show. And I was trying to listen to the male listeners. They want more male topics. So that's why I didn't go into just the female stuff. So hopefully you guys are listening.
Yes. Yeah, there are lots to talk about when it comes to men and hormones and aging. So
yeah.
Important one.
Well, thanks, Dr. Kelly. We'll talk next time soon about some other topics, why we need to test and not guess to improve our health and longevity.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Debbie.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.